Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. I'm Alex Perala, the editor-in-chief of Find Biometrics and Mobile ID World.
And I'm Tony Bitsionis, the communications director. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Let's get right into it today because we have a very special guest waiting for us, Maxine Most of Acuity Market Intelligence. We're going to be talking with her shortly, but we still have a couple things that I'd like to talk about. You ready?
Oh yeah, some big news to cover.
Yeah, so let's start with this story. I'm going to ask you about the TSA. There are a couple big news items coming out this week, but first, I believe you have some news for us about a bill.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight this for listeners in case anybody missed it. There was an effort to basically cut the TSA's funding for its biometrics program. So the TSA is rolling out a facial recognition program across America's airports. It's meant for, as usual, security and convenience. And the TSA gets funding through something called the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Bill. It's just a routine bill to renew funding for the agency. And there was an amendment added to the bill by certain privacy-focused lawmakers who just wanted to stop this rollout of facial recognition by the TSA. And it failed in the legislature. It was a pretty resounding vote, 88-4, to pass this FAA reauthorization bill without this amendment. So I just thought that was really notable. Kind of gives you a sense of the appetite among American lawmakers to like really put the brakes on something like this.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's it's really interesting how it ties into a story we just reported on today, also to do with the TSA, and that is that their director came out and said that with the current way that funds are allocated, they won't even be able to accomplish their goal of having facial recognition in 400 airports and for another 25 years.
Yeah.
Because they're only getting 9 million US a year right now to go towards that goal. So it's kind of funny that on the one hand, we're talking about a victory, a major victory where, they passed this bill without this amendment that would have paused or stopped the expansion of their facial recognition program. And on the other hand, a couple days later, they just said, well, we don't have the money for it anyways. So please change the way our funding is being allocated.
Yeah, we're talking about 2049, he said, when they would finish rolling it out. So yeah, I mean, these senators, Merkley, Markey, the folks who are always pushing for privacy, which is good, but their efforts maybe aren't even needed because the TSA says it just does not have the funding it needs anyway. But before we move on, we should just be clear that what the administrator of the TSA is saying, David Pekoski, I think his name is he's basically saying, like, can you just make sure we get the funding we need to finish this sooner? So he thinks it could be finished if they're properly funded by, I think he said 2033, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's a little complicated. We don't need to go into the details, but basically they were relying on funding that was put in place as kind of a surcharge on travelers after 9/11, supposed to just add this little fee that would go to security. And about a decade ago, legislation was introduced that took some of that money and actually put it towards trying to pay down the deficit, which has skyrocketed since then. So, I mean, none of these efforts are working. And anyway, Pekoski is saying, like, can you stop taking this money away from us and just let us have it so we can finish rolling this out? So we'll see. I mean,
yeah, let's let them sort that out.
We'll let them sort that out.
Yeah, I'm not going to get involved.
So, but there was another thing that we should talk about very quickly before we move on to Max, who I really want to talk to, which is the latest BIPA news, because that's super important for not only Illinois, but everybody in the biometrics industry. So what happened with BIPA?
Yeah, essentially the amendment to BIPA that we've been reporting on for several weeks is ready to be signed into law. It's passed its final hurdle, and it's now on the governor's desk, ready to get its final little signing, and it'll officially amend BIPA to change the law. So violators of BIPA are no longer charged per infraction, but per victim.
Right.
Which, as we've discussed in the past, is a pretty substantial change and a victory, I think, for small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, it's definitely being framed that way. And you can see why when you look at a case of, I'm making this up, but there are actually a lot of cases like this. If an employee was like using a fingerprint scanner to clock in and out for years, and then quit or was fired or whatever, that not with the company anymore, and then a lawyer approaches them and is like, you can get like claims per scan.
Yeah, $1,000 per infraction it was, right?
Yeah, which I mean would be divided among every litigant involved in a class action lawsuit. So it doesn't end up being that much money for the claimant, but it's a lot of money for the business. And so it's like, for a small business that was using a biometric time clock, this makes all the difference in the world. Going from you get a fine per scan to you get a fine per employee who files a claim.
Yeah, but that would make a huge difference for a small business. And we saw in the past Metas and other huge companies paying hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements that they can, quite frankly, they can afford to pay.
Nobody cares about Meta.
But nobody cares about Meta except for one person. Actually, maybe two. But for these small and medium businesses, this is a huge win, I think.
Yeah. So the bill passed the Senate last month. It just passed the House. Like you said, it's going to the governor's desk. I remember a spokesperson did say it would be given like a careful review. I don't know if that's just like boilerplate language or if they really are trying to signal that they're not sure the governor will sign it, but it looks like it's probably going to actually become law.
Yeah, it seems like it's well on its way.
Okay, so moving swiftly along, it's time to get some data-driven insights. Should we talk to Max?
Yeah, let's do it. I want to talk to Max.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we're really happy to welcome Maxine Most to the show. Maxine, everyone who listens to this show is going to know Maxine. She is Acuity Market Intelligence's principal analyst and founder, and she's also the driving force behind the Prism Project, which, again, a lot of listeners will have heard of, but we'll get into that for those who aren't familiar with it. We actually had started working on the Prism Project in collaboration with Max last year, and that was under our old management at Fine Biometrics, and our organizations unfortunately had kind of different strategic priorities that disrupted our work together. But Fine Biometrics is fully independent now, and we are very happy to be back with Max and aligned again working on this really important research. So Max, a very warm welcome to you.
And I'm so happy. I'm so happy to be back working with Fine Biometrics again, and both you, Alex and Tony. It's exciting, and I think we're going to do great things together. So I'm pleased to be working with you and happy to be here today to talk about it.
Us too. It was like, as soon as we went independent, we were like, we got to talk to Max. So we're really happy about this too. So, I mean, everybody probably knows about the Prism Project, but maybe just to start things off, can you give a brief explanation of like how it came to be and what it is?
Sure. The Prism Project grew organically out of some research that Fine Biometrics and Acuity Market Intelligence had engaged in together. And what's interesting is the research was definitely around, how this emerging digital identity ecosystem is evolving. And what kind of information and data is going to be useful for people to understand the market and to actually leverage the technology and solutions to solve problems in the realm of digital identity. And the Prism concept grew organically out of that research, and it really fundamentally shifted the research that we were doing and turned it on its head. And the Prism Project was born. And the whole idea behind the Prism Project is that we've kind of created a new paradigm for understanding digital identity. And for us, that paradigm means biometric centric, or biometrics at the core, right? Mm-hmm. I think when I think about digital identity, to me, biometrics is critical to that construct, because if you think about what the definition of biometrics are in the context of the world of technology, not in the biomedical context, biometrics literally are the link between a human being and their digital data. And my perspective, and this is the perspective of the Prism Project, and this is what drove all our research, is that without that biometric link, you just have digital data. Mm-hmm. You just have a lot of digital PII, which we have everywhere floating around. And the fundamental problem we're facing is, how do you connect that to a human being? How do we know that the human that we're interacting with on the other side of a digital divide, or even in person in some cases, is that person that's identified with that data, right? How do you make that connection? And that's really what the Prism Project is about, is to say, if we're going to go forward, as we go forward, I shouldn't say if, because we're doing it, as we go forward to create a global, secure, reliable, privacy enhancing, self-sovereign digital identity ecosystem, you have to have biometrics as part of that process. Mm-hmm. It isn't going to be that without biometrics. So that's really what's behind the Prism Project. That's why I'm so excited about it, having been in this industry for 20 years and finally being able to say, yes, if we're going to solve this problem, you got to have biometrics doing it.
Yeah, and it's also, over that time, the industry has got so complex and so many players have entered the arena. And so I always saw like a big part of the value of Prism is just like making sense of that, because there's just like a million players. A lot of them are kind of offering what seem like the same thing. And it's, it's really important to get some kind of independent voice to just explain, like, this is what this company is doing. Here's how it fits into the landscape. And so like that was what I understood to be kind of the part of the key rationale when Prism started. And also now why this report that you have coming out is like focused on financial services, because it's like it's so complex and broad that you actually need to just go kind of sector by sector and look at it that way.
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because as I said, the Prism kind of evolved organically, right? And that's exactly why it evolved, is because we're trying to do research and make sense of this marketplace. Okay, how do we do that? Well, I'm one of those people that I love to make order out of chaos. That's kind of the way my brain works. And that's one of the reasons I've been doing market research and enjoyed it for so long. It's you're diving into these really complicated problems, and there's so much information and data. And I would research, and then I get to a point where, okay, things would start literally clicking together in my mind, how they connected, how they fit together. It's like a puzzle, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what happened. We created this structure to say, okay, how do we understand this? How do we organize the information? How do we begin to evaluate? How can you compare these different vendors in the industry against the needs of the industry? Like, how does that all work? And that really is a great way to talk about the Prism. It is a context for organizing information and for understanding it. And what's more is, so many of us within the technology marketplaces get so involved in what we're doing. There's a lot of navel gazing, and there's a lot of internally directed viewing and conversation and context and language, right? And so one of the things we're trying to do with the Prism 2 is to break out of that and say, this is actually built and designed for people that are trying to understand, evaluate, and deploy this technology, right? We want to write it in a way so that, for example, in the financial services market, you don't have to understand all this crazy identity technology. right? We try to be really careful about the language we use and the, not getting stuck in acronyms and all those things that make it hard for people who are trying to do their job to understand the technology and figure out how to use it.
You're making it more
Yeah.
digestible for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's actually it's a funny parallel between Acuity and Fine Biometrics, because we're also trying to like translate basically a very complicated industry to a general audience. And that's why it's not just news that we do things like we write white papers, and occasionally we'll write a press release for somebody, and it's because they don't know how to talk to like a normal person.
Normal human beings do not care about the things that techno nerds and technology market geeks care about. It is true, and we forget, I mean, I'm constantly involved in conversations in the industry, and one of the things that Acuity has done for years is provide strategic guidance. And I am always working with companies and saying, who is your audience and why do they care? Why is this relevant to them? And I think that's one of the beauties of, what Fine Biometrics has done over the years. And it's what we're trying to do with this project. And it's a lot of the work that Acuity is doing, especially in the last couple of years, because 20 plus years ago, when I got into this industry, it was much more of a very it was like a club, it was like a narrow, exclusive group of people that were looking at these, biometric technologies and try to figure out how do we get the false reject rate slightly lower or whatever. And now we're in a world of, I'm a bank and I can't tell who the heck is on the other end of my mobile app. Should I give them a credit card or not? Right? Like it's a very different world. And so we, as an industry, I think have to stand up right now and say, you know what, we understand the technology, we understand how to solve these problems. We need to communicate broadly to the world that that expertise is available, and we can talk about it in a way that doesn't scare people.
No, that's a good point, because certainly it's a conversation that Alex and I have been having more and more, or seeing it come up more and more recently, and that is how broad the impact of what the biometrics industry is trying to do is, how it impacts everybody. How, when we talk to our families and our friends rarely about work, they don't really listen. It's not really that interesting if you're just explaining what is biometrics, what space are you in. But if you can get them to understand how it absolutely will affect them and continue to affect them, the way that we're all becoming more and more digitally connected. Everybody's got a phone. Everybody's always on their phone. If you're not, then that's great. That's a huge accomplishment.
Agreed.
But I mean, everybody's always on their phone, and your banking information and your identity, they're all there. And so we're trying to educate more people on how important the biometrics industry is in protecting their identities.
Well, it's funny because I say biometrics to people and they look at me like, with that strange look on their face. And I said, oh yeah, your Face ID on your phone. They're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Or recently I keep having these conversations as I'm checking out at Whole Foods, because they have the palm scanner, which I am like, again, I've said this multiple times. When it first came out, I was like, you have to be kidding me. And now I'm in love with this thing. I literally go into Whole Foods. I don't even need my phone. Okay, I need my phone because I'm doing my Amazon returns. But I just, to check out, it's like so brainless, and I love it. And when people start to see it in context, or you talk about people getting to the airport, right? Or you talk about, oh yeah, how like when you pull your app, your financials, your bank app up on your phone, and it just does your Face ID to log you in. Like then, like people, then like the light bulbs, go off, and you can see people's eyes widening, and it's like, oh yes, And so even if they think they know what biometrics is, and you use that word, they're like, it's like the sci-fi, futuristic, scary, like post-apocalyptic world. And they're like, oh, but then if you say, oh, it's Face ID on your phone, or it's checkout at Amazon.com, it's like their whole face lights up. So it's, we have a lot of work to do, right? To shift that sort of darkness. And look, there are serious problems. Like, let's not pretend there aren't, right? But that's what I think is, again, coming back to the Prism, because that's why we're here today. It's the whole point is let's get the information out there. Let's educate people. Let's talk to people, in this case, in the financial services industry, and say, hey, look, you have this problem. We understand that problem. Here's how this technology can help you solve that problem. And hey, here's companies that are actually doing this today and getting real world results, right? To make it something that isn't so futuristic and scary and, insurmountable, to bring it into a context of, here's a company like mine that was having a big problem, and look, they could solve their problem. Oh, maybe I can do something like that.
Yeah. So on that note, like you've been doing a lot of research on financial services in particular. So like, I guess what, like, do you get the sense that managers get the need for biometrics in financial services? Like, what have you found in terms of adoption and interest and understanding, things like that?
So I think, there is definitely more mainstream interest in adoption. It's still kind of in sporadic fits and starts. What I would say is that, and again, this goes back to what we're trying to do with this particular report, is like, we're sort of looking at what like the really big trends are. What are the key trends in financial services? The emergence of fintech, digital transformation. If you look globally, the changing dynamics in population in terms of younger people who are completely tech savvy or older people who struggle with technology. If you look at what's happening in the world of inclusion and trying to address the underbanked, right? There's all these sort of like, there's like 6 or 8 really big driving forces that are sort of universal within financial services. We looked at, McKinsey and Capgemini and Deloitte. We went through all the big consulting firms, right? And we kind of distilled what they're saying about the state of financial services. And we kind of broke that down and say, okay, here's these kind of universally accepted, key mega trends and driving forces. And then we went through and said selectively, okay, here's how biometric centric digital identity can actually address those. Right. And we stepped through that process, whether it's making technology more accessible to older people who can't punch numbers in, but can put their face in front of their phone to log in, or young people who cannot be bothered with going ever to a physical branch in a bank. Right. These solutions are out there. And so like, here's how biometrics addresses each of these sort of big trends. And then we have examples of companies that are actually doing it. So I would say we're across, going back to my, foundational belief and evolution and education in emerging technology markets, which is really wrapped around Silicon Valley and the technology adoption lifecycle, which, I still think that Jeffrey Moore's book is a Bible for people trying to understand market evolution. We've crossed the chasm, right? We're past the point of, early adopters and kind of far out technology and like, okay, does this stuff work and can it solve a problem? And we're moving into this phase of mainstream adoption and, kind of like what is characterized as a tornado state of market evolution, where there's more and more companies that are interested. And so, yes, mainstream managers who are hearing from their upper management, okay, here's these big driving trends that we have to address, right? And the first and second tier management and director level folks are out there going, great. Like we are seeing exponential increases in fraud, or we're seeing incredible drop-offs in terms of credit card applications, or, we're seeing what is called really interesting, this kind of massively accelerated fraud, where they'll have an attack. It's not just some random like attack here and there. It's like you'll see the same face, on 1,000 applications with different data, right? These accelerated attacks. And so they're out there going, oh my God, how do we have to find ways to solve these problems. So the whole point is to direct this information towards those people who are, the first line people and sort of evaluating potential solutions for the problems that their higher level management is saying, look, you need to go solve this, right? So I think we're starting to see more literacy in that area, but I also think we're seeing a lot of people who don't understand anything about this technology, and in the end don't really want to understand anything about this technology, but they have to have information to evaluate and assess, and have some kind of place to start in kind of trying to understand how they can use it to help them solve their problems.
Mm-hmm.
You're
going to say?
Yeah, sorry. So I was going to say that sounds like at least it's trending in the right direction. But like through your research, what would you say is or are the main like stumbling points or obstacles for digital transformation, for the adoption of these kind of solutions that are quite frankly needed?
So, what's really interesting is that, I have a tier 1 bank client, and one of the things that was happening inside of that organization was, you had sort of these people around who were focused on the identity piece, and they were very, very aligned kind of with the risk assessment people, because risk assessment people are used to having lots of different signals and trying to make sense of different signals. And so for them, biometric data, they can digest that because it's another kind of signal. Where we were getting a lot of pushback was sort of more on the, and this was particularly true in this organization, was sort of the IT security and cybersecurity people, because they tend to see the world in black and white. Like, historically, there's been a lot of work done on trying to create what I really call just better passwords, right? Like whether it's a, highly encrypted password or some kind of hard token or soft token, SMS, whatever it is, right? To me, it's just a different version of a password. And it's the framework, when you think about that, is okay, it either matches or it doesn't match. Right, it's the right it's the right code you just sent me via SMS, or it's not. It's the right password, encrypted, whatever kind of 128-bit encryption, 256-bit encryption. All that stuff's ridiculous, because with the advent of sort of the next generation of computing, it's not going to matter how many digits of encryption you have. But the point being is, it's an exact match, right? It is. We have some kind of password or its spawn, as I like to call it, that we're going to exactly match to something we have stored and say, okay, that's the right person, right? And so what we're seeing now, which is really interesting, is the IT security and cybersecurity people are going, okay, for years and years they've been like against biometrics because it's not an exact match, it's a threshold-based technology, it's a risk signal, Now they're accepting that they're going to have to do this because the existing system has failed and will only continue to fail. I just went to a bank and they were like, okay, you have to change your password every 90 days. And I just laughed. I'm like, seriously, that's like technology from 1990. What are you talking about? Anyway, point being is, so now the IT security and cybersecurity people are going, okay, well, all right, this biometric stuff. Now the problem is, their first reaction in this particular organization was, oh, we'll go build an algorithm ourselves. We'll go build a facial recognition algorithm and we'll scrape faces off the internet to train it.
Nice.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
Let me explain to you 6,000 reasons why that's a bad idea. And like, yeah, that was tried 20 years, 20 years ago in this industry. And everybody who understands anything in about the biometrics industry has like made a bunch of these mistakes and knows this stuff. So the good news is there's movement in these big in financial services and other verticals in the big enterprise space, where there's finally acceptance that, okay, we're going to have to figure out how to use biometrics identity, because this 0-1, like it has to match perfectly or it doesn't match, password based model doesn't work anymore. But we have a lot of education to do with those people, right? To help them understand that biometrics are not like other data. You can't just go out and do this. Is like, this is one of those things where you see something on TV and there's a little thing on the screen that says, do not try this at home. Like that's kind of how I feel about biometric solutions and biometric data capture and management and all the rest of that, right? We have an industry of incredibly brilliant people who have been spending years trying to figure out what the best way to manage biometric data is, because it's not like other data. It's more intimate and personal. And if we do it badly, we're not going to make the problem better. We're going to make the problem worse. If all we do is repeat what we've done with PII, so that it's everywhere and every company you're dealing with is importing it and managing it and storing it unsafely, right? We've made the problem worse. And so the upside is, yes, there are changes in organizations. These things are happening. People at the mid-level management are starting to like be responsible for evaluating this stuff and trying to figure out how to make it work. And there's still education that needs to get done and still obstacles. And so, I think it's time for the industry to step up and broaden our message and be able to speak to non-technical people with expertise in specific vertical industries where they are in terms of the problems that they are trying to solve. And again, that is what we're trying to do with these vertical Prism reports. Like, how do we make this stuff? How do we organize the information? Getting back to what you said initially, Alex, about like this being a framework for organizing all of this complexity. How do we organize it and present it in a way that actually is useful to people and helpful? And the other thing that I love about this, after spending years trying to sell reports for $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, it's free. It's a sponsor-based model, right? This is it's a relatively low-cost investment for people that want to sponsor the report for a broad distribution base, which we're now looking at like over 100,000. To communicate these things and to get this information into people's hands for free. And to use
that's like, if you are a big player in this industry, like you should be just as concerned about education as we are here. Yeah. Like that's the barrier. Like I love that story about the bank that's like, how do we build our own algorithm? Like
no,
like,
don't.
If like Walmart saw what OpenAI is doing and is like, we should build a like just insane.
No. Sell us cheap, like rubber boots and groceries, whatever. But yeah, so I think that's very interesting, and that's really where we are. We're in a dynamic in the industry where I think it's time for industry leaders need to stand up. And the problem is that companies want to do this on their own, right? Mm-hmm. And okay, there are several big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies in this industry who, okay, they have the ability and the clout to some extent to engage in pretty significant strategic market education programs. But most of these companies, you can't do it on your own, right? You can't go educate every single bank, right? You can't. And the thing is, people are always focusing on the top 10 or 100 banks or healthcare organizations or whatever it is, right? Like there's so many small companies that operate in these fields, right? You can't reach them all yourself. You just don't have the resources to do it. We have to collectively operate as an industry now. And that's why I think it's so important to step up, to collaborate in a way where, yes, some of your competition is involved in this project. Okay, if we're all fighting over the same sized pie, and that's the dynamic, then okay, like, all right, well, you don't want to give an inch to your competition. But the point of the Prism is to like expand the pie exponentially. Let's just make the pie so much bigger that there's so much more opportunity for everybody. And we can reach, all the small and medium-sized businesses where, who are the majority of businesses in the world, right? And help them understand why they want to adopt this technology and how to do it and who to talk to about it.
There's a lot of pie out there.
There's a lot of pie. I've been talking about this for 20 years in this industry. I'm like, when I first got into the market, I used to say this. We're standing on a football field, and in the United States, it's that's American football, and in the rest of the world, it's like a soccer field. That's okay. But you're standing on this playing field, and everybody's huddled in 2 square yards of space. Or, meters, that fighting, and I've always said to the companies I work with, especially small ones, go find someplace else on the field to play where no one else is going to bother you. So my vision of this is let's just make that playing field so much bigger.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I did want to bring up something. You shared some research with us, some preliminary research. I saw, so you have a projection for biometric digital identity revenue forecasts in financial services from this year to 2028, and the annual growth rate was 41.2%. That's a crazy number.
Yeah, well, we're talking about like 3.7 billion now, growing to about 14 0.8 or 9 billion, and like these numbers are never exact. Like I always tell people, when you're looking at forecasts, you want to be looking at kind of the overall scope, not the actual individual values. It's like, what does that range look like? And I tend to be pretty conservative with my forecasts. There are a lot of people who have much bigger numbers out there. I've been building these forecast models through Acuity for years. And one of the things that we do that's, I think, very different than most market forecast models is that we do what I call bottom-up models. We count things, right? A lot of market research firms, when they're trying to build forecasts, will talk to the biggest vendors in the market and the biggest customers in the market. And they'll ask the vendors how much they're going to sell, and they'll ask the customers how much they're going to buy. And then they kind of do some magical stuff. And then they come back with forecasts, or they're basically selling this back to the people that gave them the information. What Acuity does is we only do forecasts where we can count things. So the model that we built in financial services was based on country by country numbers, which we collated regionally and looked at population, current population, current adult population, current banked population, current unbanked population, and growth factors of all of those things. And then looked at, how many of those people are onboarded digitally, and then, how many transactions we think they're going to do. And that these are not including, like Face ID transactions. These are actual, non-device based, not non-device resident biometrics, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the beautiful thing about the model is we built these models, and just a little commercial here, full page sponsors in the vertical reports, in the Prism reports, the flagship as well, get the models that we built that to develop these forecasts. And the way the models are built is there's these variables that, we use the hard data we could find to build the models, and then we have a bunch of assumptions. And when we built the models, all the places where we put in assumptions about growth rates, about costs per transaction, about how many, what we think the growth rate is going to be in both, whether it's population or banked population, or transaction interactions, or transactions or interactions, I should say. Those numbers are all variables, and the model's built in a way that you can change those. So if you don't like the numbers that I used, you think they're too high or too low or whatever, you can go into that spreadsheet and muck around with those numbers, and it'll just spit out the new numbers. So, I think that's always been my philosophy about forecast modeling. One, it has to be bottom up. You have to start with things you can count and quantify. And two, you have to put the variables in so you can play around with it, because nobody, nobody is perfect. Nobody knows these things for sure. It's always a best guess in some way. So I just think of it as a tool, and it's a really useful tool. So again, if you're a full page sponsor in any of our reports, you get that tool as part of your benefit of sponsorship. And if people are interested just in the models, talk to me. We can work something out if you're interested in looking at how we do modeling, and you want to get your hands on one of those models. But the idea is it's about enabling people. All this whole project, right? It's about collaboration in the industry, and how do we give people tools, whether it's the vendors that are sponsoring the reports or the end users that are reading the reports, right? How do we give you information and tools for you to make sense, to organize the information in the market? And I keep going back to what you said at the beginning, Alex. I love that, and I'm just going to steal it forever now when I talk about this. That's the whole point. And yes, these are our numbers. It's something like, I think we came out, I think it's $40 billion over the next 5 years in revenues in financial services. And this, this includes onboarding and authentication. There can be wildly different pricing, between those two types of biometric services. But, again, we're just trying to normalize and trying to kind of contextualize, and, don't look at the precise numbers, look at the scale.
This is proof that Acuity is legit, because how many market forecasters can actually explain their models? I challenge you to find one.
Well, not only that, like I said, we we share the models, and the other thing too, just to toot my own horn a bit. One of the things, if you go to the Acuity website, if you're interested in finding out more about this, the reports we have that are very old, I think they're more than any report that's more than 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old, is available free on the website. So if you want to look at how we do this, you can go back and pull reports that were written, 10, 15 years ago. I think even 7, and you can actually download the entire report and look at all of the exhaustive data and analysis and everything that we've done. So, we are very transparent in terms of what we do and how we do it, and the claims we make and the forecasts we project, and, you can go judge for yourself how accurate we are or not.
And we'll be sure to include all the links to the Prism report and to the website and your Acuity stuff all in the episode description.
Yeah, if you go to the Acuity store, it's acuitymi.com, and go to the store, you'll see there's a bunch of old reports there that you are free to, if you're into that kind of thing. Some of them are 400 pages long. Have at it. Enjoy yourself.
I know that our time is limited here, but before you go, maybe we should give people a sense of who else is involved in this. Like, who should we mention? Sponsors? Who helped you put this together?
Yeah, so let's start with partners like yourselves, Find Biometrics. We have 3 key partners. You guys are high on the list. And then we have a Peak IDV, which is our sort of video content partner. That's an outfit run by Steve Craig, and they're doing some really, really cool stuff. Peak IDV.
Really smart guy.
Yeah, smart guy. He's worked at numerous companies in the industry and has a great perspective. And then also, of course, Identity Week, which I'm sure most of you know that brand name because of the conferences they do. They do one in the US, one in Europe, and one in Asia, which is in Singapore each year. And they've been a stalwart in this industry for years. And they have a identity portal where they're looking at identity very broadly, including document security and biometric identity and identity more broadly. And we're partnering with them, and they are a really good source of information. They're putting out some really interesting free reports that I think are worthwhile as well. So we really appreciate just collaborating with different folks in the industry that I think have the same objective, which is how do we advance this industry? How do we grow the pie? How do we make it easier for people to be successful? And then, of course, as I said, we are a sponsored-based outfit in terms of the Prism Project, and you can go to the Prism Project website, which is the-prism-project.com, and learn about our sponsors. And I'm going to rattle their names off now quickly. This is, we have a very impressive list, which is why I'm going to do it. And this is alphabetical, folks. And I'm sure these are names you're used to hearing: One Cosmos, Anonybit, Assignio, Authentic ID, Auth ID, Auth Signal, Aware, BioID. We have a new one now, Mexican integrator, Biometria Aplicada, Entrust, FaceTech. G&D is also a new sponsor we're really happy about. IDEMIA, Identify, Identi, ID Mission, IDR&D. A lot of IDs, obviously.
Yeah.
iProve, Encode, Innovatrix, Keyless, Trustmatic, Paravision, Tech5, Veritad, Veridas, and Wicket. So, I mean, it's like a who's who. And I am proud to read those names off. And, maybe someday there'll be too many that I can't even read them off. But these companies have been engaged in this process. And again, it's very collaborative. And if you want to find out what these companies are doing in these different vertical markets, the Financial Services Prism is the one that is coming out any minute now. And then we have 2 other vertical reports this year, one for government services and one for travel and hospitality, which is not just including sort of the airport facilitation and experience, but what we like to call couch to destination and beyond. So we're looking at casinos and resorts and sports arenas and convention centers and, any place that you can really take this kind of facilitation technology, which was actually developed in a lot of ways, in the airport environment, and then extend that on. So, and then of course, in October, we're going to have our 2nd annual flagship report. So there's tons of opportunities for companies to participate, to leverage, the work the Prism Project is doing, to engage with us and to sort of help us grow the industry and make the pie bigger and, step up into this leadership position in the marketplace so that we can make sure that as this technology is deployed, it is done in a way that is safe and effective and secure and privacy enhancing and, protects people's PII.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah, get in touch with Max if you haven't already. You'll be in good company. And hopefully by the end of the year, if we have you on again, it'll just be the whole episode will be like listing
we'll just be listing names. That would be great.
That would be ideal. Yeah. Okay. Well, Max, thanks again so much for joining us. And it's great to be back working with you. And let's all just get more pie.
Yes.
Here, yeah.
More pie.
More pie. And
we'd
love to have you back.
Great. Thanks, guys. It's great talking to you always.
Thanks, Max.